Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Sage Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 3 must-starts for the 2022 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about 5 prospects who, going into Week 3, are currently being started in less than 30% of leagues. Typically, when I want to talk about must-start players, I don't want to talk about the obvious top 12 running back. I want to mention players who are currently being considered as options that you may be looking to bench, but instead should be starting by reconsidering their overall situation, as I'll go ahead, present statistics, and justify the reasons as to why we should be giving these players a chance to whether sit in our flex position, starting tight end, quarterback, etc. So the schedule for today's video is going to begin by going over last week's results, talking about those players in terms of must-starts, looking at the overall record, where we went wrong, where we went right, and where we'll continue to go as we progress through the weeks. Then we'll go ahead, we'll talk about the 5 players I wanted to mention on today's video: 1 running back, 2 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 1 quarterback, and then we'll talk about some pick'ems for Week 3 of the 2022 fantasy football season. We did pretty well in the pick'ems category, so we'll go ahead, we'll check that out. Again, for those of you who haven't checked out Underdog Fantasy, be sure to do so today. When you use promo code ANGE today, when you sign up and make a first-time deposit, Underdog Fantasy is willing to match up to $100 of your first deposit. So go ahead, check that out. There's a link down in the description. Do not forget, when you're playing the pick'ems game, higher or lower, there's always that insurance pick that you can go ahead, activate that. I was able to take advantage of that for a majority of this past weekend, so we'll go ahead and talk about that in just a bit. But outside of that, be sure to subscribe, click the like button. We're trying to get to our goal of 70,000 subscribers, creating daily fantasy football content in order to help you win a 2022 fantasy football championship. Thank you very much. All right, let's get into talking about last week's results. Week 2, we had 5 players mentioned as must-start candidates: Michael Carter, Ramondre Stevenson, Sterling Shepard, Melvin Gordon, and Allen Lazard. As of their overall rankings within their own singular position, the best player was Michael Carter. Ultimately, he was still the number 30 overall running back in a half PPR and number 22 in a full PPR scoring format. Outside of Michael Carter, who honestly, he had his ample opportunity. Breece Hall was the one to score the touchdown out of this team. 7 carries, 5 catches, 12 total touches. Had himself ample opportunity, but just wasn't able to get over the hump. Either way, outside of Michael Carter, everyone else, in my opinion, based on where they finished within their own singular position, was a fail. So this looks like a 1-4 week, which overall brings us to a 5-7 overall standing. Ramondre Stevenson, though we expected him to get more receiving work, and though I anticipate he is going to get that receiving work in future contests, wasn't able to do it this past week against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Had himself 10 total touches, but just not enough yardage to go ahead and complement his performance to get him to that next level. A touchdown certainly would have got him there, or more receiving work. Sterling Shepard, 10 targets, 6 catches, 34 receiving yards. Ultimately, opportunity and receptions were there. The average depth of target and the way they utilize him wasn't. Again, he was only being started in 1% of lineups last week. We took a big, swing at him. Honestly, I think going forward, still, he's going to be a primary, receiving threat in that offense. So if you went already ahead and picked him up from last week, be sure to keep him on roster, because Kenny Golladay, Kadarius Toney, Wan'Dale Robinson, they are all pretty much phased out of this offense or injured. So Sterling Shepard, good option going forward. Melvin Gordon, of course, we anticipated that game to be a blowout in the direction of the Denver Broncos. The Broncos have not shown up thus far this year in terms of an offensive powerhouse like we anticipated them to be. They look a lot like the Denver Broncos of last season. So until they're getting to that pace, even with 11 touches for Melvin Gordon, unless the touchdown is going to be there, the 53 total offensive yards is not going to get the job done. Moving on, Allen Lazard was able to catch himself a touchdown. Pretty decent week, 8.3 fantasy points. Doesn't kill you, doesn't help you, so it's neutral. I'll leave that as a negative as of right now. Anyway, 1-4 from last week. We're trying to get better. I think the way that I approach these players is always going to be in the same factor. I found a lot of success in doing so. And though these specific players did not find success in their given weeks, it's not to say that my process is bugged in a regard. It's obviously not 100% accurate, but I think a lot of these players could have very easily found themselves a lot more success if 1 or 2 things went in their direction. Either way, let's go ahead and let's talk about our potential prospects, our must-start players for Week 3 of the 2022 fantasy football season, beginning with Dameon Pierce. The starting running back of the Houston Texans now, Dameon Pierce, is going to have himself a pretty good opportunity against the Chicago Bears defense. Mainly because last week, what we saw from Dameon Pierce was completely different than what we saw of him in Week 1. Week 1, we had Rex Burkhead playing 70% of the offensive snaps in this lineup. And then we completely flipped that around in Week 2 as Dameon Pierce handled 66% of the offensive snaps, having himself 15 rushing attempts and 1 reception, 16 total touches on 16 total opportunities. Fantastic overall performance from him. Obviously, we would have loved to see him put up a touchdown, but 8.2 fantasy points and a half PPR. Not a bad option as of last week's performance against the Denver Broncos. Pretty stout run-stopping defense. Now, again, like I mentioned, he takes on the Chicago Bears. Their defense as a whole is going to have a couple missing pieces. Roquan Smith, their starting middle linebacker, their field general, as I would like to call him, is going to potentially miss this game. He's dealing with a hip injury, hasn't practiced all week long. If you're going to be missing your primary middle linebacker, the guy that is mainly involved in terms of stuffing the run, it's going to be extremely difficult to stop said running game, especially considering how well the Houston Texans offensive line has played. According to Pro Football Focus, the grades across the board for the Houston Texans offensive line is better than average. They've played well, and hopefully that's going to continue to be the case. They take on the Chicago Bears, who last week we saw the Green Bay Packers absolutely run through. The Green Bay Packers rushing attack consisted of 33 rushing attempts for 193 rushing yards. Of course, we saw Aaron Jones find a touchdown on the ground, found some success through the air as well, finding the end zone. Ultimately, I think there's a lot of potential here. And the fact that Lovie Smith has already come out this week and said, outside of Dameon Pierce, the entire offense just needs to finish better. And we struggled to do that last week. He is singling out Dameon Pierce and even did say, the effort that Dameon Pierce is giving at the end of plays to gain every single inch, every single yard, no one else is doing that in this offense. And that's what kind of separates him from the pack, which is obviously going to keep him within this lineup. Now, the final thing I wanted to mention before we move on to our next player, currently, Dameon Pierce, he's being started in 28% of leagues. Again, it's less than 30%, pretty good number as of right now. And last week could have very easily had a touchdown. They had an opportunity inside the 5-yard line, first and goal from the 4. They always want to sit in this shotgun formation where they're running, the zone action, and they're going ahead and handing it off to Dameon Pierce. And he found a lot of success doing that last week within this offense. But on the goal line, got stuffed immediately. They never went back to him. Hopefully, when they get down into those situations, they'll go ahead, have Davis Mills under center, have a fullback back there, and punch the rock up the middle and find success. All right, let's go to move on. Let's talk about our next potential prospect, another must-start player. It is Romeo Doubs of the Green Bay Packers. As of this current moment in time, the circumstance that Romeo Doubs is in really does lend him a lot of opportunity, potentially. As of today, Friday morning, when this video is being recorded as of this moment, we have no information as to who is practiced for the Green Bay Packers wide receiver corps, but we do know the Thursday overall participation designations. We saw Allen Lazard, Christian Watson, Sammy Watkins, and Randall Cobb all not participate in practice on Thursday. If that is going to continue to trend in the direction of multiple wide receivers missing from this lineup, there is a very good chance that Romeo Doubs is going to be the primary number one. And there's a reason why Matt LaFleur even came out and is quoted to have been said, Romeo Doubs is going to have to take more of the workload this week. If that's going to be the case, with Aaron Rodgers, that is starting quarterback, playing against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, let's not forget, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are a fantastic run-stopping defense. And like we just mentioned moments ago with Dameon Pierce, talking about that Chicago Bears matchup, we saw the Green Bay Packers offense run the ball 33 times for 193 rushing yards last week against Chicago. If they want to implement that and try to utilize that kind of rushing scheme and approach against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they might not be able to find as much success. We're talking about a run-first offense versus a run-stop defense, an unstoppable force versus an immovable object. And if, in fact, we get into a stalemate between the two, passing the ball is going to be the biggest difference maker. Romeo Doubs currently only being started in 1% of leagues. Throwing him out there as another great option. Moving on to Chris Olave, wide receiver of the New Orleans Saints. Chris Olave last week had himself unbelievable opportunity. Led all receivers in that offense with 13 targets. Had an average depth of target of 24.6 yards in week 2 alone. Now in week 1, he had himself a good game still. I mean, to get 7.6 fantasy points is no joke. He followed it up the next week's performance, 8.5 fantasy points, 13 targets, 5 catches, 80 receiving yards. When I went ahead and watched every single snap of that game, I mean, I wrote down notes in terms of all the incompletions in which Chris Olave had and whose fault they were. One of those passes were dropped. The rest of them very easily can be blamed on Jameis Winston, whether it's throwing the ball into the ground, multiple overthrown balls in which they're 5 yards ahead of Chris Olave, overthrown out of bounds. There are so many circumstances in which, yes, they're trying to get him involved, especially deep down the field. There's a reason why Jameis Winston right now is the number 1 quarterback and is tied with Russell Wilson in deep passing attempts, 20 or more yards down the field. They want to get Chris Olave this kind of opportunity. And what they primarily wanted last week was to bail themselves out. They were losing quite mightily in that fourth quarter, and they needed a big play in order to resurge that offense and get them down the field. They unfortunately were not able to do so because Jameis Winston just wasn't accurate enough. If he's a little bit more accurate, we're talking about Chris Olave very easily being a home run player on a given weekly basis, having the ability to take the top off an opposing defense and find success. I think he's a great option this week against the Carolina Panthers, whose offense is definitely going to be struggling due to Baker. If this just gives more and more opportunity for the Saints to be on the field offensively, Chris Olave should have himself a fantastic performance. Moving on to Evan Engram. Now, I can already hear it. I already know the vibe. For those of you who are just completely against Evan Engram, you can ignore this. You can skip this section. There's timestamps down below for a reason. But I like Evan Engram this week. He's currently only being started in 7% of leagues, yet he has himself a lot of opportunity and an incredible matchup against the Los Angeles Chargers defense. So let's talk about what Evan Ingram's utilization and usage has been in the first 2 weeks. He played 71% of the snaps in week 1, 69 in week 2. In week 1, had himself 4 catches on 4 targets, 28 yards, 4.8 fantasy points, and not a great performance, but obviously has outdone anything Cole Kmet has done in the last couple weeks. In week 2, 8 targets, 7 catches, 46 yards, 8.1 fantasy points against the Indianapolis Colts. Led the team in terms of total targets this past weekend. Now, I will admit some of the concerns about Evan Engram does rely in the touchdown upside region. As of thus far this season, he has not seen a single red zone target within this offense. Majority of that has gone in the direction of Zay Jones, Travis Etienne, James Robinson, and of course, Trevor Lawrence's favorite receiving option, Christian Kirk. But with that all being said, the fact that we are coming off of a week in which Evan Engram led the team in targets, there's only been one other tight end on this offense that has gotten himself a target or reception, that being Dan Arnold. 1 target, 1 catch for 8 yards, pretty much irrelevant within this offense. This distribution of opportunity gives me confidence that Evan Engram is going to maintain as the number 1 tight end of this offense. And let's not forget whose offense this is. This is Doug Peterson pulling the strings. We know how much utilization he had back in the day when he was the Philadelphia Eagles head coach with Dallas Goedert and Zach Ertz. He was able to get both those tight ends to be top 12 in a singular season. Just putting that in perspective, just how rare that is in fantasy football. We could barely find a good tight end on a weekly basis. Imagine 2 of them coming from one offense. Nonetheless, he takes on the Los Angeles Chargers, like I mentioned prior. The Los Angeles Chargers defense, over the course of the last 7 regular season games, going back to last year, the defense has given up 66 targets to opposing tight ends, which has led to a minimum of 63 receiving yards by opposing tight ends on a weekly basis over the course of the last 7 games. Again, just this last week, Travis Kelce very easily should have scored a touchdown. Again, he was on the 1-yard line. If he doesn't get picked up and super slammed into the ground, maybe he hurdles that defender, finds himself in the end zone. The week prior against the Las Vegas Raiders, Darren Waller wide open in the end zone. The ball's thrown 3 yards behind him by Derek Carr. Could have had himself a touchdown. You even go back to the back end of the 2021 year against Las Vegas. 7 catches, 72 yards allowed. The week prior, Noah Fant had a monster week of 15-plus fantasy points. We've seen a lot of tight ends find a lot of success against this defense quite recently. And I'm expecting that to continue to be the same going forward. Let's move on to our final option. Final player I wanted to mention, it is Derek Carr, quarterback of the Las Vegas Raiders. As of this moment, he takes on an incredibly advantageous matchup against the Tennessee Titans defense. Now, over the course of the first 2 weeks of the season, Derek Carr has put up 295 passing yards, 2 touchdowns against the Los Angeles Chargers, and 252 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns against the Arizona Cardinals defense. Now, both those defenses, yes, they haven't played up to their overall potential thus far, but based on what we've seen the Tennessee Titans look like over the last 2 weeks, gives me that much more confidence in starting Derek Carr. On top of the fact that we have Josh Jacobs, who earlier today, based on the report that I read, missed practice due to an illness. If in fact he is going to be missing any sort of time, this could be even more of a pass-heavy scheme this upcoming weekend in Tennessee. Just putting it in perspective, Daniel Jones went 17 for 21 passing, earned a 81% passing completion percentage against his defense, while we saw Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs completely torch his defense and force the Tennessee Titans' entire team to pack it in the middle of the third quarter. There's a lot of potential here, and I anticipate Derek Carr to air it out, whether it is to Darren Waller, Devontae Adams, and hopefully Hunter Renfrow is healthy. If not, Mac Hollins could very easily step up and have himself a sneaky good week here in week 3. All right, now that we've covered our must-start potential prospects for week 3, let's go ahead and let's start talking about some pick'ems for week 3, giving you guys some perspective as to how last week went first and foremost. So as you can see on screen, this is the entirety of last weekend's pick'ems that I put forth. Okay, obviously some of these were done on Friday, Some of these were done on last Saturday's live stream. Again, every Saturday, we will be live streaming here on the channel, 1 p.m. start time, in order to give you some perspective. We doubled our money this last week. Like, just kind of giving you a rundown. Obviously, the performances that we were anticipating were going to play well, for example, Gordon, Shepard, Carter, Stevenson, those were the killers. But everything henceforth after that was quite successful. Just giving you some perspective. This is the rivals matchup as they're pitting two players against one another to determine who's going to have a higher overall base in that specific statistic. Receiving yards, obviously, I anticipated a lot of success for, the Miami Dolphins receivers. We know Joe Flacco loves to throw the ball a bunch. This was a close matchup here. We could have went 5 for 5 if it wasn't for Jared Goff being an absolute machine and Kenny Galladay's completely fell asleep and doesn't play offense anymore. That is for certain. The other suggestion I had last Saturday was in regards to this 5-leg higher or lower pick'em slip. Of course, we anticipated a lot of these higher or lowers. Antonio Gibson just had to go ahead and ruin it. But luckily, I went ahead and I put that insurance policy in there. This protection method right here, this is what allows me to miss one of these overall picks and still win money on my overall bet. So let's talk about what I anticipate seeing this week and some pick'ems that you can go ahead and participate in coming up. So to begin, I want to go ahead and put all of the must-start players from today's episode onto one singular pick'em slip. Of course, we're going to start with Derek Carr. Higher on the overall passing touchdowns. We're expecting him to throw 2 this week. Chris Olave, higher on the total receiving yards, 40 or more, gets us that W. We're looking for Dameon Pierce to run over 60.5 rushing yards. We're expecting that as well. And Evan Engram to surpass his overall receiving yard total there. Again, like I mentioned, if in fact one of these singular bets is to go wrong and is to miss, I'm still able to win money here while I still have the ability to go ahead 6 times my money with all 4 of these correct. Now, if I don't want to take that insurance policy, we can go ahead and go for 10 times. But as of right now, I'm always worried about that one leg always messing me up. So we're going to go ahead. We'll submit this. Let's go ahead. Confirm. Good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to scroll down this list now and just go ahead and put together as many pick'em slips as I possibly can in terms of players that I immediately see and I like their numbers on the higher or lower basis. So in this game, Tennessee versus the Las Vegas Raiders, I've already gone ahead and put something in regards to Derek Carr, but I really do like Derrick Henry. I mean, it's already highlighted because I looked at it a little bit earlier. Derrick Henry on the higher in terms of rushing attempts. Like I mentioned earlier this week in terms of trade targets, what is more likely to happen? The Tennessee Titans fold their entire season, stop running the ball, or they begin to hand Derrick Henry the ball 28 or more times per game on the ground alone. I'm anticipating that to be the case, especially against a softer run-stopping defense like the Las Vegas Raiders. As we continue to scroll down this list, of course, there's a lot of players, there's a lot of numbers. Earlier today, Joey Burrow had himself a rushing yard total. Yeah, there it is. Okay, good. Here we go. I looked at it for a second, it wasn't there, but I do like Joey Burrow passing this number. He's been easily able to accomplish that in each of the last 2 weeks. I think this offensive line continues to fall apart, and he's forced out of the pocket running the ball, and to be honest, should be a pretty easy number for him to eclipse. That's pretty much one run for him. Maybe it takes 3 or 4, but ultimately I think he's very easily able to surpass 13 rushing yards this upcoming week. We move down the list. In this same matchup, of course, you could go ahead and add one of his receivers. I do like T. Higgins over 68.5 receiving yards. I have mentioned it earlier this week in my wide receiver rankings video in regards to T. Higgins has surpassed 70 receiving yards in 7 of the last 11 games he's played. You know what? To be honest, I'm just going to take it. Moving on. I'm convincing myself at this point, guys. So let's go ahead. Let's talk about Joe Flacco. I'm taking the higher there as well. Joe Flacco has just been a machine in terms of throwing the ball on a consistent basis. I'm expecting him to continue that. And to be honest, while I'm still within this matchup, I do like Tyler Conklin going over. Do I want to risk it? Now, you know what? We're just going to go with the 4 legs here. I thought about going over on the reception count there. The guy played 100% of the offensive snaps last week. He's going to have a good matchup against Cincinnati, who's typically struggled against tight ends, but as of right now, we'll keep the lineup as is. So as you can see on screen, we'll go ahead, we'll put this one together, submit it, confirm it, and we're good to go. Moving on to the next. We walk into the Buffalo Bills matchup here. Of course, this could be an extremely high scoring one. If Gabriel Davis is once again going to miss this week due to the ankle, I think this higher on Stephon Diggs could very easily be accomplishable. We know that Micah Hyde is going to be missing this week in terms of the starting safety for the Buffalo Bills. That may lead to more success for these 2 wide receivers who, again, their receiving yards totals have already been brought down based on the matchup alone. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to skip past that. I want to go ahead and I want to go higher on Jalen Hurts rushing touchdowns. Based on what we've seen thus far throughout Jalen Hurts' career, we know him to be a vulture on the goal line. He's absolutely going to be in that conversation. I know it's a 50-50 chance, or maybe, higher or lower in certain aspects there, but it's kind of a coin flip as to whether or not him or Miles Sanders ends up scoring. And if I had to bet, per se, as to who's going to do it, I'm anticipating Jalen Hurts to fall into the end zone this week, once again, like he typically has. Now, we'll go ahead. We'll continue to scroll here. Again, there's a lot of numbers here. I kind of like the higher on J.D. McKissic, just not bold enough to take it as of this moment. We did like another number here. I like higher on Travis Kelce's fantasy point total here, 14.45. Again, I'm anticipating Travis Kelce, especially against the Indianapolis Colts, who will not have Shaq Leonard for another week here, who struggled against Evan Engram last week, and even in week 1, didn't play very well in terms of stopping O.J. Howard, who had himself 2 receiving touchdowns in that game, then quite literally disappeared in week 2. So we'll go ahead. We'll take advantage of this, play the number 1 receiving option of Patrick Mahomes. We'll go ahead and scroll down into the Colts matchup. Again, when I'm talking about receiving backs, I think Nyheim Hines could very easily, eclipse this number. He's been able to do that each of the last 2 weeks. He gets a pretty regular amount of targets out of this backfield. I'm anticipating him to be able to eclipse that and go higher. Again, as you guys have been able to tell thus far, I really like going higher on a lot of these players. I'm hoping for the best for every single one of these players to end up producing and having themselves great weeks. Now, Justin Fields could be an option that we could potentially go lower on a lot of these numbers, considering, again, he's not really completing very many passes per week. And even when he is, they're not for many yards. He's not been able to surpass this passing yard total for quite some time. The passing attempts, again, a lot of the times that he drops back, because it's been a pass play, he's looking to run the ball eventually. So those passing attempts have lowered. This could be something that you could go after on the lower. Just depends if you're confident against, the Houston Texans defense, considering that could be an advantageous matchup for him. Maybe he ends up unlocking his overall potential. Keep an eye on that. Continuing down this list, other names that I like DJ Moore, higher on his overall receiving yards. Again, we have seen over the course of his career that he is the kryptonite for Marshawn Lattimore. I'm expecting this to continue to be the case this week. We'll go ahead. We'll lock him down there with the 54.5 higher number on the receiving yards. Scrolling down this list, I want to go find my favorite receiver as of right now, the guy that I love watching, Amon-Ra St. Brown. We're going to go ahead and we're going to take the higher on the fantasy points. Like I mentioned on our Wednesday wide receiver video, if in fact Amon-Ra St. Brown holds to his standards, 8 catches, over 64 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown in this game, we're very easily in a half PPR scoring format going to see 16 plus fantasy points in the game. If he wants to break the 8-game streak, then by all means, he can break it and break my heart while doing so. But nonetheless, we're going ahead and we're going to close out this pick'em slip and today's video. All right, we're going to go ahead and make another one of these. Again, I'm not made of money. $10 bet here and there, that's pretty good. We'll put the insurance on it. If we're able to get all 5 legs here, we can go ahead and 10 times our money. If we go ahead and get 4, at least we'll 2.5 it. No big deal. If in fact we're in a scenario where maybe we're just feeling ultra confident about our pick'em slip, you can go ahead, put together a 5-pick higher or lower pick'em slip and 20 times your overall bet, the entry amount that you want to put in. Again, check out Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code Andrew today, and when you do so, Underdog Fantasy is willing to match up to $100 on your first deposit. So if you're interested, check that out today. There's a link down in the description. Thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to play it safer and go ahead and submit this. And that's pretty much it. Again, I want to thank you guys for watching today's video. If you have not yet already, be sure to subscribe to the channel, click the like button down below. And do not forget, tomorrow, 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time to 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, we have a 2-hour block. We'll be live streaming here on the channel. Start and sit questions. We'll be drafting some teams. We'll be putting together more pick'em slips for you, for those of you who are interested. So be sure to check that out. Come on by tomorrow. Of course, if you click the bell notification button down below, you'll be notified when I'm live streaming, when my latest content is available. Obviously, Sunday morning, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Hopefully, we won't impact any sort of complications in terms of tech-related issues or YouTube-related issues. But nonetheless, I appreciate you guys supporting the channel. And until tomorrow, I'll see you guys. Peace.